As you recall in the previous training video, we learned how to multiply two fields together to get us our weekly gross, multiplying weekly hours by hourly rate. In any case, in this training video, I want to show you how you can do group calculations. In other words, looking at my departments here, what if I want to go ahead and calculate the total weekly gross for the sales department? How much we're paying out to our sales employees, maintenance. In other words, I want to be able to group them, because if I don't group them, then I have to come over here and add up these three, and then come down here. Let's see, here's another sales record, another sales record. Just go ahead and group them all together and give us one record that says sales, and then gives us the total amount for that department or that group. So what I did, instead of messing with this query because I like it the way it is, I went ahead and I saved a copy of this as my weekly pay. Double click, open it up. It's the exact same fields, okay? And to save a copy of your query, so you have your original, which is the pay rates, then the other one, where I'm going to make some changes in it, my weekly pay, where I'm going to go ahead and group them by department. Then just come up here and click on File, go down to Save Object As, and it wants to create a copy of it. Just give it a new name, and mine was Query Weekly Pay. Click OK. Let me click on the File tab again, and there it is, okay? So let me go ahead and right-click on the pay rates and close out of that, so I just have my weekly pay. And let's go ahead and group these together. To do that, let's go to our design view. Now when it comes to grouping your records together, it's really easy to group your records by field. All you have to do is come up here on the Design tab to the Show Hide group and click on Totals. When you click on that button, notice down below it adds an extra row. It's called the Total row, and by default it wants to group each field. Group it by last name, group it by first name. Well, if it's grouping by all of them, that's not going to be helpful. I just want to group it by department. So let me ask you this. If I'm grouping it by department, I don't need the first and last names. Do I want the first and last names in there? Well, I may want it so I can have them grouped by department and get the totals for that group, but it's not going to work in this case because it'll group it by last name. I mean, how many last names are going to be the same where it can group those together, like all the Smiths? And then how many have duplicate first names that can group them by the first names? It's not going to work again, at least not with our totals example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hover over the top of each column, or this column, click, as you saw my black arrow pointing down, and then go ahead and hit the delete key, and then click. And if you hold your left mouse button down, you can drag and select multiple columns, but I just need to get rid of the first and last name columns because I don't want to group them by that. Okay, I've got these other three fields. I don't need the hourly rate. Let me hover over the gray bar up at the top till my pointer turns into a black arrow. Click on it, selects the column, hit the delete key. So now I have it grouped by all three. Well, I only want it grouped by department, and I want it to, let's say, get the average of the weekly hours for that department. So when you click in it, it gives you a drop down, so I can go ahead and do average. You see what's happening? You can either go ahead and group that field, or you can perform some expression or calculation by it. It's got to be one or the other. Typically you're grouping by one field, and then all the other fields that are there you're performing some sort of expression, or in this case we want to average it. So we've got group by department. We want it to average within that group the weekly hours. So for the IT department, it'll give us the average weekly hours for that group. And of course, as you see over here, it's not going to work by grouping by the weekly gross. Remember, I want the total for that group for the week. So I click on the drop down arrow and let's get the sum. Okay, let's go ahead and take it for a test drive, hit the Fun Run button, and there we go. We got all the departments grouped together and the average of each department. You would have learned this in my Excel training video, but anytime you see pound symbols there, it means that the data is too large. It can't fit within that a small window or small cell. So we can hover over the right-hand side until our pointer turns into black arrows pointing in opposite directions, and double-click really fast, and wow, we got a lot of decimal places there. We'll clean that up in just a second. But in any case, we get the average hours for that group of all those who worked in customer service. Looks like they're slacking, aren't they? Customer service doesn't like to, on average, work that much, or we either had one or two employees that took off for vacation that week. And then we got their weekly gross. So the entire customer service department has grossed, or we have to pay out for that department, over $9,000. So when you're doing group calculations, pick the field you want to group it by, and then the other fields you want to get the calculations for that group, either in this case an average or a sum or anything else that you saw listed when we changed these fields, clicking on the drop down arrow from group to one of those expressions. Let's go back to our design view because I don't like the weekly hours having so many decimal places. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on that field and go down to properties. Let me close out. You can also click in that field, come up here on the design tab to the show hide group and click on the property sheet. I mean, there's more than one way to do this. And then the format for that field, let's click in that cell, is going to be fixed. Now it'll give you an example over to the right, so if I scroll over I can see it, but then I gotta scroll back to find out what the name of that example was. Better yet, hover over the left hand side of the property sheet until your pointer turns into arrows pointing in opposite directions, then click and drag, stretch it out, and then click on the drop down arrow. Much better. So I can see that the fix by default is going to have 2 decimal places, okay, after the decimal. So click on it, then I can click and drag it back, and then go ahead and hit the Fun Run button. Well, that's fine, unless I just want 1 decimal place, in which case go back to my design view. And again, make sure that your cursor is flashing in the field that you want to change the properties thereof, because if I'm in another field, then whoops, I'm changing the properties for that one. Let's go back to the weekly hours. Fixed decimal, we want to change the decimal places from 2 to 1. Click on the Fun Run, and there we go. And then when you're done, be sure to save your work. I'm going to go ahead and close out. And weekly pay, I could actually right click on this and go down to rename and say weekly pay by department, and then hit enter to accept that. In fact, better yet, let me double click and open it up. And then don't forget, as we learned when we were working on tables in an earlier training video, if I want to go ahead and get the total of my average weekly hours and weekly gross, come up here on the Home tab to the Records group, click on Totals. It adds a line down below. You can go ahead and click in that and click on the drop down arrow. We can even get the average for the average. And then also for the weekly gross, get the sum of everything we have to pay out for that week. Now that we're further along with our training, you've realized by now, or hopefully you have, is that when you're looking at a table or a query, you have 2 views. You have the design view and you have the datasheet view. The datasheet view is the place where we enter in our data. We can edit, view, or change our data, the records that is. And you can see that I got my query open for weekly pay by department. If I open up a table, it's the same thing. You've got the name of the fields up above and the data or the records down below. Let me go ahead and close out of that. Now you can format the data sheets by being in datasheet view, of course, then coming up here on the Home tab to the text formatting group and clicking on its expandable dialog box button. You've got the default set here. If you don't like the flat default, you can go to raised and see the sample down below. And you can change, well, the background color, the alternating color. As you can see here, it's alternating with gray. So it goes white, gray, white, gray. That way when we have long lines, we can actually keep track of it by staying on the gray here. In between 2 whites, sandwiched in between 2 white rows, it makes it easier to move along, at least tracking it with your eye from left to right. So I can change that to something fancier, maybe, light purple. And then grid color, something red. This is going to look awful, but nonetheless you get the point. Click OK. Yeah, that doesn't look nice at all, does it? Well, if you need to make any changes, you can either go back to it and then change it back to flat and try to remember what the default color was, or click cancel, open up another table or query, either one that has the data sheet, and then look at the colors that were there by default, then come back in here and make the changes. Or if you haven't saved it, just go ahead and close out, and of course don't save it, so you can open it back up and we're back to where we started. The third Access object that we want to go over are forms. And simply put, forms are nothing more than tables with a facelift. For example, if you open up any table, you've got the same face or layout where up at the top you have the name of the fields from left to right, and then below that, the data for that field, like the customer name, address, city, and so on. In any case, in forms, you don't have to have that layout. You can go ahead and rearrange that. Now again, thinking about the first training video that you watched, where you got that pyramid, at the bottom you've got your tables of data, because tables are the only object where you can store data. Without any tables, you don't have data. Without data, you don't have a database. Once you have the foundation, your tables of data like we do here, we can go ahead and base our query upon the tables of data. In other words, pull in data here and use criteria to go ahead and narrow down the search for the records in the tables. And then forms and reports can be based upon either a table directly here or upon a table that the query is based upon, or 2 or more tables, because when it comes to creating forms or reports that are based upon 2 or more tables, what I would do is create a query, as we learned in our query training video, that we can go ahead and pull in 2 or more related tables, make sure that those tables have a relationship into our query, and then we can go ahead and base the form or report upon that query that has those 2 tables. A good example would be where I could go ahead and pull in my customers and orders table into a query. So that way for every customer I can see their corresponding orders. But to keep it simple here, I just based this form, I call it my customer's form because it's based upon the customer's table, just upon one table, okay? So when I double click and open it up, right off the bat you can see that I gave it a facelift. It's not the same face as the customer's table, the typical layout in a table, which is from left to right with the labels up at the top. Instead I've got the labels to the left hand side and I've got my data field stacked. So I've got the customer ID with the data field here stacked upon the phone label and so on. Now, is that helpful? Well, it depends. I mean, if you're like me and you don't have a huge 50-inch monitor, if you go back to your table and you got a lot of fields, you have to scroll over to see all the fields, where in my form I can go ahead and stack them and keep them all within view here and not have to scroll over to the right. Not only that, but in the tables it shows you a list of all the records that are available. Here it has all the records, but you can only view them one at a time. In fact, down at the bottom you got the same record navigation bar as you do in the table, as we covered in an earlier training video, so I can advance by clicking on the next record button to go from 1 to 2 of 14, or back 1 of 14, or we can click on the outer button here to go to the last record, or the outer one to go back to the first record. In addition to the layout here, I can go ahead and design the form. You've got your form view and the design view, where you can go ahead and design how you want your form to be viewed, which is like this, where I've got the labels to the left hand side and the fields stacked like that. You also have the datasheet view. Click on that, and if for whatever reason you need to go back to a datasheet view like format, again like the tables and also the queries where you have the fields up at the top from left to right, and then the data below, well, that's simple enough, right? Just a simple click here. And then we also have the layout view and the design view. Now with the layout view, we'll go over that in a later training video, is the way that you can go ahead and drag your fields around, the operative word being layout, to lay out your form. You can do that in the design view. So the difference between the two is this is limited to just moving the fields around basically, where design view you can not only move the fields around and lay it out, you can also add more functionality to your forms, do more coding and things like that. But if you just need to mess with the layout, moving fields around, you don't need to do any coding or things like that. Use the layout view in any case. So back to our form view, and just like your tables in the datasheet view, in the form view you got a lot of the same options when it comes to navigating through your records. In other words, again, you got your record navigation bar down below as you do in your tables. Also up at the top in the home tab in the sort and filter group, that was available in our tables, the datasheet view. You also have available in the form view here. You can click on the filter button, do sorting, do filter by selection. In fact, if we want to go ahead and come down here in the state field, you can go ahead and filter for that field, like let's say of the 14 records, how many clients or customers do we have from the state of Connecticut? Or you can advance to the next record and say, how about from Montana? You can either go ahead and right click on that field and say, let's do a filter by selection where it equals MT, or let me click off in a blank area. You can come up here, click on the filter, gives you a list of all the values available in that field. You can uncheck them all or find out how many clients we have in the state of Arizona and California. Click OK. Well, just two. One from California, one from Arizona. And you've got the toggle filter option here as you do in the datasheet view. You see where it's highlighted down below. It doesn't tell me which field has been filtered, but if I click on it, it goes back to and displays all the records that I originally started with. But if I want to go ahead and filter it, click on it again, and it goes back to the filter being applied. Again, to which field? Well, we don't know. So if you want to go ahead and unfilter it, you can either find a field. If you're not sure which field, just start on one and right click and go down to see if you can find the clear filter. If it's not available, it means that that field has not been filtered. Right click, you'll find it here because we filtered the state. Instead of right clicking on all the fields, you can just come up here on the home tab to the sort and filter group, click on the advanced drop down arrow and not mess with it, just clear all the filters, okay? And we're back to where we started, 14 records. You can also do sorting. So if I want to sort my customers by name, the first record here begins with an S for star. So if we want to sort ascendingly, I can either right click and say A to Z, or come up here on the home tab to the sort and filter group ascending. I mean, whatever works for you. A to Z. So it begins with the A's, in this case the client that I have that's towards that end of the alphabet, the upper end, begins with B for big. You can click and go to the C's for candy, D's, and so on. And then of course to remove the filter sort, I can come up here and click on it to remove it. How about finding a record? For example, let's say I want to find the customer. Customer calls in and says, oh, we updated our phone number. It's like, oh crud, I quickly got to find that. So to do that, just go ahead and come up here on the home tab to the find group, click on find. It's the same thing that I went over when we worked on our tables. You can click on the Find button, or the shortcut key is Control F, and then it says, what do you want to find? Well, I want to go ahead and find, let's say it's the Disney company they called, and they've got a new phone number that I want to update here. Now it says down below, what field do we want to look in? Is it the current field? I don't know which field I'm in. Just go ahead and click on it, and that's going to be the current field now, the customer name. So that took care of that. Or you can click cancel, click in the field, and then go ahead and when you pull it up, the find and replace, you know that you're in that field. Do you want to match the whole field where it has to match exactly what you typed in here, has to contain Disney, CO dot, or just any part of it? So for example, if I come up here and I go, let me delete company, I know it's Disney, I don't know if it's company, Inc., Incorporated, whatever, just any part of that, any customer name that has Disney in it. Then click Find Next, and you'll see it found Disney in the customer name Disney CO, and it's got that highlighted. Great. Let's click Find Next again to see if we have any more. It says no, you only found one, which I mean would make sense. We want to keep our customer names. They should all be unique and not have the same name, but if you had a field that you want to search through, like maybe city, you want to be able to find how many customers are in the same city, you can go ahead and do search and click Find and keep clicking Find until you toggle through all of them as you're bouncing from one city to the next, if you have more than one customer that is in the same city. And then finally, when we want to enter in a new record or make any changes to the data in the form here, again, this form is based upon the customer's tables, so what we do in here, any changes or any additions, new records, it'll add them or update them to the table that it's based upon. So if I come down here, we got the record navigation bar, to create a new blank record, click on that button. So it's going to record 15 of 15 because we already have 14, so this is going to be number 15. We've got the customer ID, which is the primary key field. Remember, it can't contain any blanks. Also, it can't have any duplicates. So this, again, is based upon the table. So whatever in the table is going to be found in here because it's linked to it. If I leave it blank, let's go ahead and enter in all the other information. And again, notice that when I type in the phone number, how it pulls up the mask. We talked about this in an earlier training video. It's just pulling up what was designed in our table there. And I'll show you how to do that in another training video. So I'll just go ahead and enter in the phone number, hit the tab key. Now when I hit the tab key, it advances me from one field to the next. If I need to go back to the field, instead of picking my fingers up off the keyboard and clicking back to that field, let me hit the tab key so I'm back in city. You can hold down the shift key and hit tab. With the shift key held down, hitting tab advances to the previous field. Hit the tab key to advance to the next field or moving forward. Now you'll notice that in the customer forms, just like the datasheet view, when it comes to entering in our records in any of the datasheets found in the tables, queries, and also forms, you got the pencil. The dot 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 with the pencil means that it's in edit mode, or in this case, we're creating a new record, and we haven't saved it. As long as you see it, it means the record hasn't been saved yet, so to go ahead and save it, I'm going to hold down the shift key and hit enter. Again, this is based upon the table, and in the table, the customer ID is assigned the primary key, so it says, hey, you can't leave it blank. Click okie dokie, click in there. Go ahead and type in a customer ID. Well, what customer ID am I going to enter in? If you had it on auto number, automatically generating an ID, it would be unique and I wouldn't have to worry about it. But that's okay because I can't have any duplicates. If I have a system that my company has, I can go ahead and type in a new customer name. You can also have lookup fields, so I can click on the drop down arrow and see what customer ID is available. Or I can come over and see customer ID, scroll over to the left hand side just to make sure for this example that I find a duplicate, 32758. 32758, shift enter, again no duplicates, so let's go ahead and make sure it's unique, 33,000. Shift enter, it accepts it. Now remember, any records that I create in this table or any fields that I update should update the customers table. So if I go back to the customers table, didn't work, I lied. No, I'm kidding. Because I already have the table open, it needs to be refreshed. So up here in the records group, of course on the home tab, click on the refresh button, there we go, it added it. Otherwise, if I had it closed and I created a record, when I pulled it up, it would be available. Now, there are many form templates that you can use that are called instant forms, where you can go ahead and select over here your table or your query that you want to base your form upon, and then click a button, boom, you got an instant form. That's the good news. The bad news is that these instant forms don't allow much in the way of flexibility, unlike if we created our form in the design view, which is my favorite way because you get all the flexibility on designing your form. In any case, if you need something quick and instant, here we go. Go ahead and select your table, or again your query that you want to base your form upon. Come up here, click on Create, over to the Forms group. Except for the form design, All these other commands in creating a form are instant forms. They don't allow for much flexibility, but then again, if you're not picky, this is what you can do. Let's start with the form button. You can read about it when I hover over it. I'll click on it. Boom, instantly creates a form based upon this table that I had selected. Now what it did is it pulled up all the fields from the customer's table, but because the customer's table was also related or has a relationship with the orders table, it listed the orders table down below. Now if you don't like that, you can click on it and hit the delete key and it will delete it. Because right now I'm in the layout view. Most of the forms, the instant forms that when you click on create, it takes us to the layout view in case if you want to go ahead and rearrange the layout by clicking and dragging the fields around. You can tell you're in layout view one of two ways. When you click on one of the fields, it'll outline it in orange and it allows you to select a field, or in this case the form within the form down below. We have the tables form, then we have the order form within it. How do I know? Because you've got two different navigation bars here that you can navigate within this form here, and then the outer one is for the customers. Now to be able to be in the actual form view and not mess with the layout, then to change it, come up here on the design tab, the related contextual tab to what we're working with, which are forms. Over to the views group, click on the view button. If you haven't associated yet or recognized quickly what the icons mean and what view that they're tied to, click on the drop down arrow. There's the name of the view to that icon associated with that icon. So go ahead and click on the form view. There we go. So we've got the two orders that this customer's made. So I can go ahead and advance to the second order of the two, or I can advance to the next customer and see their 5 orders that Home Builders has made with us. Okay. If you like that, go ahead and be sure to save your work. That's the good news. The bad news is if you want to go ahead and customize it, it's kind of a pain to say the least, as opposed to just starting from scratch. But you can still do it. And we'll cover that, how to modify your forms, in a later training video. But here's something that you need quick and instant. Let's go ahead and close out and not save it because I've got more to show you. To the Create tab again, to the Forms group. How about, well, let me click on More Forms. How about a split form? Click on that. Well, before you click on it, you can read about it, but what it does is when I click on it, it's a different form that has, well, the split view. You can see the split bar right there when you hover over it, and you get those arrows pointing up and down. You can click and drag that so you can see more of the bottom section than the top section, and of course vice versa. So the top section is actually going to be the form. Below that's the datasheet view. Now again, by default, when we create instant forms, it dumps us in the, the top section in the form layout in case if I need to move my fields around. If I'm good with that, then I can just come up here and click on the View button. It takes me right to that top section, the form view. The datasheet view down below still stays as the datasheet view. Now if you haven't noticed by now, when I click on the drop down arrow, I only have 3 views. And in the previous form that I created, I only had 3 views. But in the previous training video, when it came to switching views for that form, that we had 6 different views. We had the datasheet view. We also had the pivot table, pivot chart view. So why doesn't it show the datasheet view here? Well, usually all instant forms that you create won't have the datasheet view or make available the pivot chart or pivot table view unless you create the form from scratch in design view, which is my favorite way of designing forms because it allows for the most flexibility. Now why would you want to use this form? Well, what's nice about it is that I can see all the fields up here up at the top without having to come down here and scroll over. So why would I want this down below and not just have the form up at the top? Well, here I can go ahead and click and see the next record without having to be in the form view and click over and then click back. I can see the records before and the records after. And then if I need to make any changes, I can come up here and make all the changes without having to find out what fields are available and scrolling over. So you get the best of both worlds. Let's go ahead and close out of that, not save it. Click Create, and let's click on the More Forms. Multiple items. Go ahead and click on that. Again, every time we create an instant form, it's always going to be in Layout View first, in case we need to move things around. And the way you can find out if you're in Layout View is, of course, to click on the View drop-down arrow. It's highlighted. Or another indicator is that anything that you see in orange around the fields, or even a little tag for the table that you can select, that means you're in Layout View. You can modify it by moving the fields around, which we'll do in a later training video. But in any case, we're in Layout View. And the Multiple Items form allows you to view multiple records from a table in a form of a spreadsheet. So let me go ahead and click on the View button to actually go to the form view. And if you watch my Excel training videos, the spreadsheet, I mean, it's another way of saying tables in Access because the Access tables look just like a spreadsheet. But the difference is that in Excel, when you click in a cell and you keep on typing, see as I keep on typing, well, this wraps the text and it stacks it, okay? Let me go ahead and hit the Escape key so I don't save that, and then go ahead and close out, not save that. Come back up to the Create tab, to the Forms group, And how about a blank form? Click on that. It's in the layout view. And then over to the right hand side it has the field list, a list of all the fields for all the tables. But what's expanded is the customers. Why? Because that's what I had selected. So if I want to ignore them, then just click on the plus sign, expand the name of the other table here, billing info. Then I can click and drag those fields over onto the layout. I'll just go ahead and do customer. Let me close that, collapse it. Customer name. And then notice after I click and drag the first field, then it says, okay, this is the table you're focusing on. If you want additional fields, and you can see down below fields available in related tables, that you can go ahead and expand those and click and drag them as well. As long as, of course, they have a relationship. Otherwise, if they weren't related, they wouldn't be listed here, okay? So then watch what happens when I go ahead and click and drag other fields to it. It stacks it. So again, we're limited on the control. We can't just move the fields around as I'd like to. So it creates something quick, almost an instant form. But if you don't like the layout, then, well, this isn't the form for you. Let's go ahead and close out of this and not save it. And then create forms. My favorite one is the design view because you can create it from scratch and have complete control. Well, let me click on it. It opens up and, well, speaking of controls, it actually has controls that we can add to our form, like a button. Over to the right hand side we have the field list, the list of all the fields in this table that we had selected here when we clicked on the design form button. And then we can just go ahead and click and drag those fields. And notice when I click and drag, it's not stacked tight one on top of another. I can hover over it, move and drag them around. In any case, we'll learn this a little bit later when we learn how to modify our forms. But for right now, design view is the way for me. Go ahead and close out of this and not save it. Another way to create your form is by using the form wizard. When you run it, it'll ask you a bunch of questions, you give it the answers, and then boom, in this case it'll create us a nice looking form. During the creation process, we can actually choose from the 4 different types of layouts. So to get started, come up here, click on the Create tab, go to the Forms group, and there it is, Form Wizard. It's got the little wand. Click on it. It opens up the wizard and it says, okay, here's the first question. What do you want this form to be based upon? Either tables or queries, or a combination of both. As you recall in an earlier training video, I could select one of them. Let me click on the drop down arrow. You can see I've got all these tables in one query. I could go ahead and select one table, the employees, and then go ahead and add the fields over to the right hand side, select those, select another table, and add additional fields. As long as those tables are related, then it'll make sense in the form once we create it. In that, for example, customers are related to orders, so I could add both fields from the customers and the orders. So for every customer I see in the form, it'll have a related order. Hopefully all the customers have made orders. But to keep it simple, we'll just go ahead and choose the customers table, and then down below click on the double arrows to choose all the available fields, make them my selection so that they'll be added to the form. Click next. What kind of layout would you like? You've got 4: columnar, tabular, datasheet. Now the tabular and datasheet, really, I mean the preview here doesn't do it justice. You'll have to try it on your own. But the datasheet just looks like the datasheet that you've seen in your tables and queries. The tabular is like a datasheet except it's fatter, it's bigger. It has a lot of space in between all these cells here. In any case, let's go tabular. Click next. And then what's the title of the form? Well, it's not going to be the prefix TBL for table. Let me delete that and call it FRM for form. And then also we'll say it's the customer form whiz. Now when I click finish, I can either open this up right in the form view so I can start entering in records. And again, when I enter the records in a form, because it's based upon the customers table, it'll go right into the customers table here, okay? So the form will show me what's in the customers table, but also allow me to modify, update, and enter in new records in the form that again is linked to the customers table and update it there. But with the form, I can control the layout. So if I want to modify the layout, then I can choose modify. So click finish. There's the layout. We'll learn how to modify our forms in the next training video. We're in the design view here, but if I want to go ahead and start entering in records, and I can switch from the design view by coming up here and clicking on the form view button. Automatically takes me to the form view, and then I can go ahead and, well, you've got all these records here. Scroll down just a bit. Here's a blank record. I can go ahead and start entering in the next record. Now after you learn how to create your form, the next thing you may want to do is to modify it. In other words, you can move the fields around, the labels and their corresponding data fields, change the layout of it. I also have some tips, tricks, and shortcuts that I want to show you to help with the front-end user when it comes to them entering in records or updating them in the form view. In any case, to get started, I've got a couple of forms here. I have my customers and my customers M. The M is for modified, so I'm going to modify this form. In other words, it's a copy of this form, That way if I screw up this one, I've got the original or the backup. So let me go ahead and double click and open that up. And it's a very simplistic layout here. We've got the labels stacked over to the left-hand side, and then to the right of each label, its corresponding data field. So we've got the customer name, start temps. So that's the first record. I can go to the next record, home builders, and so on. Now if I want to go ahead and change the layout, like let's say I want the phone and fax fields over to the right-hand side here, then to modify this, I'm going to go to the design view. And I can get to that view one of two ways. I can either come up here and right-click on the tab, go to the design view, or let me click off, come up here on the home tab to the views group, click on the view drop-down arrow, and there it is again, design view. Okay. And as you recall in an earlier training video when we created our forms, we briefly went over this, but when we went to the design view, you have the grid here, and on that grid is where you can go ahead and add and move around your labels and their corresponding data fields. Well, let me correct that. In the form and report views, they're known as text box fields. So we have the labels here, state, city, and their corresponding text box fields that pulls in the data from the table it's based upon. I labeled it customers because it's based upon the customers table. With this grid, if you need more space to add more fields, or you want to go ahead and tighten it up a bit, just hover over the border of it. As you can see, my pointer turned into black arrows pointing in opposite directions. Then you can go ahead and click and drag in one of those two directions. I'm going to go ahead and hover over the bottom and click and drag that down just a bit so we've got more room at the bottom. Now when it comes to moving your fields around, it's very simple. All you have to do is go ahead and click on one to select it, the text box, then hover over the border till you can see the four-way arrow, then click and drag it, and it'll drag the text box, but also drag its corresponding label. But what if I want to be able to move these independently? Because once I drag them, I mean, look at the space here, that's a big gap. I want to be able to close the gap between the label and its corresponding text box field. To do that, notice that when I select one, that both the text box and the label have a little square in the upper left-hand corner. That's how you can go ahead and move these independently. Just hover over it, get the four-way arrow, and then click and drag it, and it will move the label independently of the text box. And also hover over the corner of the text box and click and drag, and it moves independently of the label. Okay. When I move the fax, I need to come back and move the phone, and then if I need to move the postal code, I'm clicking and dragging, clicking and dragging. Well, what I can do instead is do a multiple selection of all those fields and click and drag them all over at once. Click and drag this back. Again, I can either hover over the text box border and drag the text box and it will bring the label back, or I can hover over the label border and drag that and it also brings the text box along with it. So to go ahead and do multiple selections, click on one, hold down the Shift key and click on another, and then hover over any one of the borders that's been selected and then click and drag, and there we go. And notice how that I didn't have enough space over here with the grid. When the text box or label goes beyond the grid compensates for it and opens up and allows it to be dropped there. So you can go ahead and Shift click as many labels as necessary and then click and drag one and they move all over at once. But if I had like, I don't know, dozens of fields that I want to move, probably the next best thing to do, instead of Shift clicking each one of those, is to do what's called a marquee. In other words, let's say I want to go ahead and select all of these fields here, their labels and their corresponding text boxes. I can come up here in the upper, well, left-hand corner or bottom or any one of the corners here, and then when I click and drag, I want to go up and over and cover those with the outline that you see there of a square, or I can do a rectangle. In any case, whatever I cross with those lines or is within that rectangle or the box that I stretch is going to be selected, okay? And I let go, and it selects all the text boxes and these labels, but not those there, because I didn't drag it far enough to be able to get to the address, city, and state. I mean, that's okay, because if I hover over any one of these fields and I click on it and drag it, it drags the corresponding labels. Let me go ahead and hit undo. Click off in a blank area. Another way that you can go ahead and select a group of fields is you can come over here in the vertical ruler or in the horizontal ruler. When you hover over it, you see a black arrow. In the horizontal, it points down. In the vertical, it points to the right. When you click on it, it shoots a line down. You see how fast it shot? When I click on it, hold the left mouse button down. You see that line? Anything that intersects it gets selected. Let go, and there we go. Or I can click and then drag, and anything in between or within that range, from the very far line to the right to the very first line to the left here, when I let go, well, I didn't go all the way over to the left, so it didn't get to the address, label, city, or state. And you can also do it over in the vertical ruler here. Just click and drag, and it selects everything from where I started to where I dragged to. And then I'll click off in a blank area. Okay, now that we learned how to select and move them, when it comes to moving, things can get off alignment here. For example, I've got the phone That's a little bit further to the right than the facts. Now I could come up here and click and select the label and then click and drag it and try to, eyeball it. And if I don't get it right, you see I'm not perfect, but Access has a shortcut that is perfect. Let me click off in a blank area. So for example, I can go ahead and use this feature to align these up exactly to the right, let's say, of the furthest label here, the facts. To do that, go ahead and select both of these labels, click on one, hold down the Shift key, select the other, and then come up here on the Arrange tab, go to the Sizing and Ordering group, click on the Align drop-down arrow, and you've got, a couple different ways you can align, either the left or the right. When I select right, Access is going to look at those two labels and find which label is furthest to the right, and then when I click on it, it's going to take all the other labels and align it up to that furthest to the right label, which was the facts label, right aligned, okay? And then of course I could go ahead and click on the corresponding text box fields here for these labels, and then hold down the Shift key and select facts, and then click on the Align, and let's do left now. So it looks at the facts, which is the furthest to the left, and then it's going to take phone and pop it right over to it, left align there. Okay, let me click off in a blank area. Let's go to the form view and see how this is going to look and work for the front end user who's going to be entering in the data. So I can either right click here on the tab, go to the form view, or let me click off. If you can't see the form view button up here, it means that we're not on the right tab. Let's go to the design tab. There it is. Click the form view, and there we go. I don't know about you, but when it comes to entering in records, I start at the top and I use the tab key to tab to the next field, okay? Well, there we go. When I tab, it goes from customer name over to phone. Let's tab facts, back to address, and then down. I can change the tab order so I can have it tabbing from the top down to the bottom, and then from the bottom to the right, and then to the bottom again of that second column. So to do that, let's go back to our design view, right click, design view. Come up here on the design tab over to the tools group, and there it is, tab order, click on it. And it shows you the current tab order. Let me click and drag the title bar for this window so we can move the window down here so we can see, okay, customer ID, there it is. Then the customer name, then it goes to phone, fax, and then it goes back here and all the way down. So if I don't like that order, then what I can do is I can hover over to the left-hand side of the phone field. See how the arrow points to the right? Click on it, it selects the entire field. Once it's selected, then click on that selection and then go ahead and drag and move your field around. I want the phone field second to the last because at the very bottom it should be our fax. So click to select the fax over on the left hand side, the row header for that row, then click and drag again and dump the fax field down below. Now the postal code's between the phone and the fax. So it'll go to phone, then to postal, then to fax. We don't want that. So let's click in the row header for postal code and then click and drag it up above the phone and then click OK. Let's test the tab order. Click on the view button. Hit tab, 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 goes down to the bottom, then shoots over to the right. Great. Let's go ahead and go back to our design view. Go back to the tab order. And what is auto order? When you click on it, let's see what happens. Let me click and drag it down here. It rearranged it, but how did it know what to arrange it to? Basically, it's got the hierarchical layout going from top to bottom. It doesn't see from left to right here. So the field that's closest to the top is customer ID, so that's going to be the first order. Then customer name, address, and then phone. And you can see phone's above city, so after phone it's going to be city, and then above state is fax. So you've got fax just below the city, but above the state. Okay, so there's the auto order. It's got it from top to bottom. Doesn't see left to right. I'll go ahead and click cancel because I don't want it in that order there. Now we have a free-flowing layout here. You have two other different types of layouts, basically template layouts you can look at. I'll introduce you to one of them so you can get an idea. You can come up here, click on the Arrange tab, and there's the table, and we've got our two layouts. You've got the stacked and tabular. Now they're not available unless I select all the fields here. So the quickest way to select it, well, you choose either marquee or come up here in the horizontal ruler till you can see my pointer turn into a black arrow. Click, so the line shoots down, drag all the way over to the right so I can select all of them. They become available now. And you can go ahead and hover over one of these, read about it, see if that's what you want. You can also view the icon to get an idea of what it's like before you actually go ahead and click on it. So if I click on stacked, it automatically stacks them, but not only that, it tags it. You see that little tag up there? It puts it in a table format here. So when I click on that little tag, it moves it collectively. And let's see, other things we can do when it's in stacked mode here, come up on the Arrange tab, go to the position. Let's control the padding. Click on the drop down arrow. If we want something that has a lot of space in between all the fields there, click on it, kind of opens it up, widens it out a bit. We can also come up here to the Arrange tab, to the Sizing and Ordering, click on the Align drop-down arrow, and let's align it to the right. And what that does is it aligns it to the center of the work area. And then if I click off in a blank area, I don't get the options to choose from, so make sure that you go ahead and select one of the fields there. Then if you want to select all of them, go ahead and click on the tag. We get our options back up here on the Arrange tab to the Table group. Let's click on the grid lines because we can add lines to these fields here, in other words outline them. I can either click on both where it has both the horizontal and vertical. I could even go down to border, something solid or dash. Let's do solid. Click on that. And then once we have the grid lines added, I mean you can't see it, it's gray here. Let's go ahead and change it to a different color. Back to grid lines. Let's go down to color and let's do something that pops that we can see, red. Click off in a blank area, and if you don't like it this way, we can go ahead and remove the layout by clicking on it, then coming up here and clicking on Remove Layout. Now, before we learn how to create and modify our reports, I think it's a good idea that I show you a report so you can see what it looks like and know what to expect. And over here I've got my report. It's the overall report. And when it comes to designing forms and reports, now we already covered how to design a form in the design view. You're going to see a lot of similarities when it comes to designing reports. So if you can design one, you can pretty much design the other, or it shouldn't be too difficult to navigate around. And we'll cover that in a later training video, but for right now, if you recall in the very first training video, forms and reports can either be based upon tables indirectly through the queries, because queries are based upon tables, or directly upon the table themselves. Not tables, because if you're going to base the report or form upon two or more tables that are related, it has to go through a query. If it's just one table, then just go ahead and base it directly upon that table. Okay, so this report I based upon the inventory query. What's the inventory query based upon? Well, let me double click and open it up in the datasheet view. If you right click on the tab and go to the design view, it's all right there. It's based upon 4 tables. All 4 tables are related. I've added all the fields that I wanted to view in the query down below in the grid. Now all the fields down here that I want to view in the datasheet view that this report is based upon is viewable. The report doesn't look up here the tables that are available, all that could be seen, just what I added down below that needs to be seen. Let me go ahead and close out of that, and let's open up our report. Now when I open it up, by default it opens up in the report view, and we'll talk about the different views in just a second here, but let's take a look at this report. Up at the top we've got the title of the report, Department Inventory, and I'll show you how you can go ahead and add titles to your reports. And then over to the right we have the current date. That means that any time I open up this report and I print it off, it's going to have today's date. So next Tuesday the 16th, if I open it up then, it'll be August 16th. How do I do that? Well, I inserted the function here. It's the now function, and you can learn all about functions in my Excel 2010 training videos there. Okay, then down below I've got the employees here grouped by the department. So for the human resource department, we've got all the employees grouped that work in that department, and then we've got the group for the maintenance, the sales, and so on. And then within each group, like the IT department, we've got it grouped by employee. In other words, we've got the employee's first name, last name, and then the computers that are assigned to each employee, the barcode or ASIC tag, the manufacturer of that computer, the date we received it, the purchase price, and then amortized. Now, I don't recall seeing amortized in the inventory query, so how come it's being pulled up in here? I just added the text box field and entered in a formula that took the purchase price field and divided it by the number 3. That's how I got my amortized devaluation of my computer over 3 years. So every year it loses 1/3 of its value. And then when I scroll all the way down to the bottom, it says this is page 1 of 1. Well, if I change this to the print preview, because what you see in the print preview is what you get, what actually prints off, it'll have more pages than just page 1 of 1 here. The report view is just a simple view to look at when it comes to viewing the results of your designing of your report here. And then before you print it off, go to the print preview. There are a couple ways we can go to the print preview. I can either come up here and right click on the tab and go to print preview, or if I right click in a blank area, there's print preview. I'm not sure if I can right click, well, in any area, almost any area on the report. There's the data field, and when I right click on the label for that data field, I can go to print preview. So just know where you're right clicking. Let me click off in a blank area. Of course, you can come up here on the home tab to the views group, click on the drop down arrow, there's print preview, or you can come down here in the lower right hand corner. I mean, if you're already down there, you can just hover over any one of those 4 there, and there's the second icon, print preview. Click on it and boom. What you see in the print preview is what's going to print off. And you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, I've got my pointer that turned into a magnifying glass that when I click on it, it zooms out. When I click on it again, it zooms in. And then how many pages do we have? Let me click to zoom in. It says page 1 of 3. How do we go to the next page? Well, there's our record navigation bar. Click on next page, page 2, page 3, and that's it. Click on it to zoom out, and boy, it goes right to the bottom here. And in fact, if you look up at the top, we do have what I would call an issue here where we've got the computer separated from the employee. I mean, if we go to the next page to the bottom, we can go ahead and see that the employee, that computer belongs to George Bond. In any case, let me go over the other two views real quick. So when I want to change my view, I can go ahead and right-click, and let's go to the layout view. The layout view looks a lot like the report view, except here, when you click on either a text field or label, it selects all the labels. So I can hover over the label and click and drag it, and it moves all the labels over, which means like I can rearrange this and move it over here, and then click and drag and move that over there. You know, rearrange it so I can have the manufacturer first, and then the date received second, and then of course move their corresponding. Let me hover over the text box fields down below, the data fields, and move those as well. I'm going to hit undo a couple of times because, wow, it's going to be messy and take me a little bit of time to rearrange that, but you get the idea. And we'll cover a little bit more about how to work in the layout view later on. So in the layout view, you can actually see all the records that are there and move them accordingly, where in the design view, let me see if I can go ahead and right click here and go to the design view. They don't show you all the records, they just show you the labels and their corresponding text box fields or the data fields. That you can just move those around without having to see all the records being moved with that field. There are a couple ways you can create reports. One way that I want to show you here is how you can create a report instantly. In other words, if you're in a rush, just come over here quickly, select a table that you want to base that report upon, or of course you can select a query because a query is based upon either one or two or more related tables. To keep it simple, I'm going to select the computers table, come up here, click on the Create tab, go to the Reports group, and then boom, click on the Report button, automatically creates the report. That's the good news. The bad news is that it's got a predefined layout. In fact, you can see it right here. Well, first of all, we're in the layout view. And hopefully you're familiarizing yourself after watching all these training videos about forms and now reports that when I click on a field, you see it highlighted in orange, that's the big giveaway that you're in the layout view. Of course, if you want to change views, you can right click on the tab here and you can see the others, report view, design view, and print preview. Let me click off in a blank area. So we have the title of the report, which is the name of the table that we base this upon, and we can go ahead and change that in the design view. Then over to the right we have today's date and then the time, which, wow, it's getting late, past my bedtime. Let's scroll down. And down at the bottom, well, look at this. That field's cut off. I can come in here in the layout view and click on it to select it, then hover over the border till my pointer turns into arrows pointing up and down, and then click and drag, and let's pull it down so we can see a bit more of it. Okay. And then you've got page 1 of 1. In other words, when we print this off, how many pages is it going to print? And it's nice to have it this way instead of just page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That way if you print this off and you hand it to somebody and it says page 1, how do they know they should have more than one page? Then if it said page 1 of 2, then like, okay, I've got page 1 of 2, I should have the second one, and they can say that they don't and come after you. So when it comes to finding out how many pages are going to print off, go to the print preview. And you can do that by coming down here and clicking on the print preview button, or right click in a blank area, or right click on the tab here, or come up here in the views group, click on the view drop down arrow, go to print preview. And then what you see here is what's going to come out of your printer. And you can see that I've got my little magnifying glass. When I click on it, it zooms out so I can see the entire page. You can see that I've got some space down below, so these are all the records that's pulling into the report from the computers table. So not enough to dump over or spill over onto page 2, so we get page 1 of 2, then we go to page 2, then there's page 2 of 2. In fact, you can see the navigation bar here that can't go to the next page. So click on it to zoom, there's page 1 of 1. And all I have to do to print this off is come up here on the corresponding print preview tab, click on the print button, good to go. When I'm done, then I can either right click and go to design view, layout view, report, or just come up here and click on close print preview. Takes me back to my layout view. And then when I'm finished, let me come up here and save my work, click on save. It's going to be report. I mean, even if I don't change the 3-letter prefix, when I save it, it'll still dump it down in reports. It recognizes it. It doesn't care about the name, but I do. I don't want it to have the 3-letter prefix TBL. I want it RPT for report. Again, very helpful when you're working on the back end later on to know that when you look at the name, that when you see TBL Computers, and you've got another one that says TBL Computers, well, which one's the report, which one's the query, if we had queries, and so on. In any case, let me go ahead and click OK. Saves it, adds it over here. Good. Another way to create a report is by using the report wizard. And as you recall, when we did the form wizard training video, the wizard's going to ask us a bunch of questions. We give it the answers, and then according to those answers, the wizard will magically, in this case, create a report for us. So to get started, come up here, click on the Create tab, go to the Reports group, click on the Report Wizard, and the first question it's going to ask us is, well, what fields do you want on your report? In other words, what table or query do you want this report to be based upon? Click on the drop-down arrow. Now I haven't created the query. That includes the two tables that I want to generate this report or base this report upon. So I'm going to go ahead and select those tables separately, but those tables are related, either directly or indirectly. I know that they're related in one way or another. I'm going to go ahead and select Departments first. Double-click and add the department code, and then click on the drop-down arrow, and let's do Computers. And I want the first C4 fields. Double-click, double-click. Now see if this makes sense. I want to create a report that groups the computers by department or department code. So all the computers assigned to the employees in the IT department is going to group them into that department, and then those in the human resource department, and so on. Okay. Because maybe I want to go ahead and get the total, get a summary of the purchase price of all the computers by department, so I can find out which department we're spending the most on for computers. Click Next. And then it says, how do you want to view your data? Well, if you want to view it by department, it means that you can see over here in the preview window how the department code is up and to the left, and down below the rest of the data is indented. It means that in the hierarchical structure, it wants to group everything by department. So it'll take all the records that belong to the department 100, human resources, group them, and then the next group 200, 300, and so on. Or I can just have it by the computers table. In other words, it keeps it all together. There's no grouping. I really like the grouping here by department. I mean, that was the whole purpose of it. Click Next, and then it says, do you want to add any grouping levels? Well, I already have one here. I've got department code. Let's see if this makes sense. How about manufacturer ID? When I double click on that, it adds it over here. Of course, you can use these arrows to, select it, remove it, select it to add it, and then you can change the priority around by going up or going down. But if I keep it at this level, in the hierarchical structure when it comes to grouping, I have everything by department. So within the human resource department, the department code 100, maybe I've purchased computers or employees in that department have computers that were manufactured by HP, Dell. So it'll go ahead and then group them by manufacturer ID. So all those, from Dell will be grouped together, and then those from HP grouped, and then the data down below. But I don't want to do it like that, so I'm going to go ahead and double click on that to remove it, and then click Next. And then it says, do you want to be able to sort your records? Well, click on the drop down arrow, and you can choose which field you want to sort your records by. Do you want it by date received? So within the group, it'll go from oldest to newest or newest to oldest, depending upon whether we want it ascending, or click on the button to change it to descending. I'm going to click it back. Well, I'm not going to choose any here. You also have the summary options when you click on that. Do you want to summarize the purchase price? I mean, it's the only field that has the number format that will allow us to get the summary of that field, the purchase price for these groups, or the average, minimum, or maximum. Let's do summary. Click Okie dokie. Click Next. And then you can look in the layout and decide what kind of layout you'd like. Do you want it stepped? Do you want it blocked? And you can see up at the top in darker orange all the column labels, and down below how the data is going to be laid out in, well, group-like format or outline. Let's go by stepped. Just leave it there, and then click Next. And it says, what title do you want for your report? Well, I would like not TBL, but RPT, so I know it's report. And let's delete departments and call it Purchasing Info. Now I can preview the report or open up in Design View and make some changes to it. Let's just go ahead and finish it, open it up, preview it. I'm now in the print preview, and let's see if this makes sense. Okay, so we've got the department code, which is the human resources, and it says within that department we have 3 employees. Well, we may have more, but these are the 3 computers that are being used in that department. And then we get the purchase of each computer, and then the summary of all 3 records here. So the summary for the department code includes 3 records, and here's the purchase price, and there we go. And it's over $5,600. Let's go ahead and scroll down. And you'll notice that down at the bottom, let me go ahead and scroll over, we're on page 1 of 2, so I can come over here and click to go to the next page, and then scroll up. And there we go. And then it gives us the total for all the computers that we've purchased for all the departments that are listed. Then if it looks good to you and you're in print preview, come up here, of course, click on the print button, and then when you're done, close out of it. Takes me to the design view, make some changes if I want to, and then right click, and then if I want to go ahead and just review it, not make any layout changes to it, I can go to the report view. And when I scroll down, unlike print preview, it keeps everything in one page. I don't have to move back and forth in between the pages to be able to see what fields I've added and the basic structure of it in a single page. Now, if there's ever a time that you want to be able to perform some simple calculations between two or more fields on your report, or even with another value or a combination of both, I want to show you how you can create that custom calculating field. In this example that I want to show you, we have already seen it in an earlier training video, but not how I got it. For example, if you recall, in an earlier training video on the reports, I had my amortize field over to the right-hand side. First of all, what is amortize? It means to write off the cost gradually. Well, what do I want to write off gradually? Well, the purchase price of all my computers. Let's say that I want to write them off over a 3-year period. So what I want to do is I want to create an unbound blank text box over to the right-hand side, and in that text box write the expression or create the formula that says, okay, take the purchase price field and divide it by 3. So I can write off a third of it each year for, again, a period of 3 years. So to get started, I need to change views. So turn your head while I change. Go ahead to the design view with the right click. Go down to design. Now before I go ahead and add my unbound text box here and write the expression in it, let's go over the layout really quick. In the page header section, all our labels, and then down below it, in the department code and detail sections, we have their corresponding text boxes. Well, how do you know the difference between a label and a text box? Well, one way to find out is just by looking at it, because the labels are transparent. You can see right through to them. Behind it, you can see the grid there, where the corresponding text boxes have a white background, so we can't see through them. And then, of course, down below we have the details of all the labels, except for the department code. That's in its own section. Why? Because as you recall, we wanted to group this by department code. So in the hierarchical structure, department code is going to have its own section above the details section. So for the first department code, let's say 100 human resources, all the computers that are tied to an employee within that department are going to be within that group, 100. So maybe there's 5, 10, 20. Then I'll go to the next department code after it's done grouping all the 100s, then the 200s, and so on. Okay, so to go ahead and add a text box field here, because all these others are text box fields, but they have a purpose. They're not unbound. In other words, they're pulling in the data from the table, well, the field department code within the departments table. And again, this report is based upon the two tables, the departments and the computers. So to add a blank text box field where we can go ahead and write the expression to pull in another value and divide it by 3, the purchase price, come up here on the Design tab, go to the Controls group, and there it is. When you hover over it, it says text box. So when I click on it, come down here, I want it to the right of the purchase price text box. Notice how my pointer has a plus sign, and it's got the same icon as the text box field up above. It's to remind you that, hey, when you click, that's what you're going to be adding. Well, it adds two things. It adds an unbound text box, meaning that it's not bound or tied to anything yet. We haven't written an expression in it, and it's not pulling data in from a table, a specific field, so it's unbound. Then it has its corresponding label, something generic like text 21. Well, we can change that, but first of all, let's focus on this unbound text box. We need to go ahead and write the expression in this unbound text box, and there's many ways you can do it. One way is to pull up the properties of this unbound box here by either hovering over the border until you can see the 4-way arrows. Double click on it really fast, brings up the properties sheet. Wow, it's pretty big. We can click and drag to shrink it up a bit, close out. Or you can right click on it, the border, go down to properties, brings up the property sheet, close out. Or you can come up here on the Design tab to the Tools group, and there's property sheet as well. Just make sure that that text box is selected, okay? And then on the All tab, which is a combination of all these tabs, where you can see it all in one, the All tab, you're looking at the control source. In other words, the control source is either what's being pulled in from this field if it's bound to a field in a table, or we can go ahead and write the expression in here. Click in it, you can either type it in or you can build it by clicking on the build button. Now the build is helpful for neophyte access programmers so they can get an idea of how to build an expression, because it gives you an example here that says, hey, if you want to build an expression, do it this way. Have the name of your field within square brackets, to add it to another field or multiply it, subtract it, whatever. Again, it's just an example here, and then how to build it. In any case, once you learn the layout of the expression, you can very quickly type it in. You probably wouldn't use this builder anymore. But since we're here, let's go over it one more time because we covered it in an earlier training video, so hopefully you're more comfortable with it. And you'll see the layout where, again, it's just easier to type it in once you're familiar with how to write your expressions. So down below it says, okay, what expression element are we looking at? Well, it's the purchasing info report, and I want to be able to view the fields available in that report because I want the purchase price. Not the label as it says there, so I need to scroll down a bit until I find the purchase price field, the text box. So if I double click on that, it adds it up above and in square brackets, and then I want to divide it again by 3 because we want to write off a third of it over a period of 3 years. So come back to my expression element, go to my operators. Now this is getting a bit ridiculous. You could just type in the / right, but again it's here. So in the operators we're looking at all, and then over in the expression values there's the / double click on it. Again, you can type it in. We want to divide it by 3. That's it. Click OK. We're done. You see, you could have easily just typed that in. Open square bracket, type it in. In any case, we'll go over that in just a second. Notice that after I clicked OK, you can barely see it here. If you can't see it completely, go ahead and right click on it and zoom in. Pulls it up in a larger box. We can see the total expression there. So notice how it added the equals symbol there. If I forget to add it, it'll add it for me. Well, at least here. There are other places that if I forget to add it, it's going to give me an error. So here we're okay because Access will add it for us. So equals purchase price divided by 3, click OK. Let's go ahead and hit the Tab key so our cursor upon exit to the next field down below the format. We'll go back in and check my work or my expression within the control source, and if it's okay then we don't get an error. Well, let's go ahead and take a look at it. Click on the View button and come over here, and there it is. It's amortized. It's taking the purchase price and dividing it by 3. So the first year we can write off for $1,700 about $566. Now I know the label's annoying because I didn't move it up at the top yet, but that's okay. And then we've got some formatting issues. Well, I think they are because I don't want that many decimal places. We'll learn about how to work with the formatting in the next training video. Let me go back to the design view. Let me right click on the tab, back to design. And as I mentioned, you could have come up in here just as easily, clicked in the box and just typed in the expression equals purchase price in square brackets. Be sure to add the square brackets. Without that, then it's not going to work. If you forget, then you can always click on the expression builder and look at the sample there. Okay, let me go ahead and close out. Even easier than that is that if you come in here, and you can see that the expression's written in here, just like we saw it. If I delete it, hit enter, now it's unbound. Now here, you have to hit the equals key to add the equals sign, because if you don't, it's not going to add it for us and we're going to get errors. So equals, open square brackets, the name of the field, close square brackets, / divide by 3. Now notice how I didn't capitalize the P in purchase or in price. Again, it's not case sensitive, so it doesn't matter. Just make sure it's spelled exactly the same. And if there's no space between purchase and price, you better not have a space over here when you're writing the expression, okay? Hit enter. It accepts it because it didn't give us an error. Great. Now let me do something with this floating label here. I can go ahead and select it, and then I can go ahead and Control X to cut it, okay? I want to cut it and paste it up with all the other labels in the page header section. So I can click on the page header bar, which tells Access that I'm looking at that section there, and then Control V as in Victor to paste it, and it's over to the right hand side. Then I can click and drag it over here, and well, let's take it one step further. Let's say I accidentally delete it, and let's say that I can't undo it. I'm like, I need a label for this so people know what this text box represents, which is, again, amortizing the purchase price of the computers. So if I need to add a label, then come up here to the Design tab, to the Controls group, and just right to the text box is the label control. Click on it, come down here, and just to the right of it, and again, you've got the plus sign. Click in it. Whoa, that's a tiny label. Well, that's okay. Just start typing. You see the cursor flashing in that little teeny tiny box. When you type, it starts expanding, so it's going to be amortized. Hit enter, it accepts it, and hey, we're good to go. Okay, let's take it for a test drive. Let's come up here, click on the View button, go back to the report view. There it is, amortized, and it's got our custom calculating field. That's taking the purchase price, dividing it by 3. We'll go ahead in the next training video and show you how you can go ahead and format these controls so we don't have that many decimal places. It's pretty simple, and I'll show you some other formatting options as well. Thanks for watching. Hey, as a quick reminder, if you like my video, please give it a thumbs up. You can also click on me and subscribe to my channel to get notified of the latest videos. And for great specials on my products, please see the description below this video.